This is the Emergency Medical Minute, sponsored by Mile High Ambulance. The Emergency Medical Minute is excited to announce that we are now offering AMA, PRA, Category 1 credits. This is accessible through our online course modules that can be accessed at www.emergencymedicalminute.org/CME-courses, or simply by clicking on the link in our show notes and creating an account.
Okay, so my medical minute this morning is about grass, weed, and ancient Rome. Grass, weed, and ancient Rome. So grass. The other day, my dog had this gurgling stomach. He was pawing at the door, wanted to go outside, and he started eating some grass. And then usually when he does that, he eats some grass, then he throws up, and then he feels better. And so I was kind of wondering, what's the antiemetic effect of grass, or why do dogs even do that? And so I looked and looked and looked, and I actually couldn't find an answer. They say sometimes dogs eat grass and it kind of induces vomiting, so they throw up and they feel better. Sometimes dogs eat grass and they think maybe it soothes their stomach. Humans don't eat grass for nausea or vomiting because we don't have we don't ruminate, and there's no medical benefit. Interestingly, there's no harm for eating grass. So I guess unless there's pesticide. So that's the grass part. The ancient Rome part. So you've heard of vomitoriums. Anyone hear of vomitorium before? No? So this is it's actually this long-standing myth. So there's vomitorium. So translation from Latin is vomitorium. And you'd think Rome, pretty gluttonous, the rich would go have these giant feasts. And I remember hearing when I was in, I think it was high school, they'd have these rooms, they'd go and they'd throw up and they'd go back and feast again, purge their stomach, and then just even more gluttonous feasting. As it turns out, that is false. There's no vomitorium. The vomitorium translation, it was sort of mistranslated. It was the entrance to a stadium or coliseum. And the idea is when the crowds entered, it was vomiting into the streets or purging into the streets. So anyway, that's the mistranslation of Rome. But Rome does come into play because you think about Roman warriors would get on ships to conquer new lands. And on the ships, they'd all get seasick. And so they'd need some sort of antiemetic. And the antiemetics they chose were wine and wormwood, which if you're sick, why would you have wine and wormwood? I think wormwood is the chemical that's in absinthe that made people demented. So that doesn't sound like a very good idea. The other thing they gave was white hellborn. And white hellborn is this plant that's actually pretty toxic. So not only would they use white hellborn as a poison, but low doses they would give as antiemetic. And it's probably because there's alkaloids in it. Alkaloids like belladonna or, things make your eyes anticholinergic. So it's interesting that they had this toxin they're giving people for nausea. So we move on to weed. Actually, before I get to weed, let's go to 1940. So instead of doing wormwood and toxins, in 1947, the first antihistamine, dramamine. It was initially used for treating people with allergic reactions, and they found out that people who were got car sick or seasick responded well to Dramamine, so it took away the nausea. And so they started using it as an antiemetic. In the 50s, they also added on things like thorazine, that's antipsychotic. They found out that was antiemetic. And compazine and Phenergan came in the late 50s and early 60s. And in the 1970s, here's where weed comes in. Cannabinoids, they discovered, were reasonably useful for treating nausea. 70s, they're starting to do chemotherapy, so they do THC for antiemetic effects. 80s, really bad chemotherapy like cisplatin came into place. They needed better antiemetics, and that's the 5-HT receptor antagonists. So Zofran came in, late 80s, early 90s, and Reglan has some, not only 5-HT, but also some dopamine-like effects. And then lastly, the NK1 antagonist, that's Substance P. We don't use this a lot, but I think it's Emetrol. No, not Emetrol. I'm spacing on the name, but anyway, the newest ones are the NK1 inhibitors. So antiemetics for dogs, grass, then humans evolved from toxins to less toxic things like Zofran.
We'd like to thank our sponsor, Health One Continental Division, and Swedish Medical Center for their financial contributions to the EMM. Donations from them and listeners like you make it possible for us to fulfill our mission of producing and spreading free medical education to the masses. If you enjoy our show, please consider making a one-time or recurring donation to help cover our operational costs and keep the EMM awesome. Click on the link in our show notes to make a donation. Thank you for listening.